She was being dragged out of the hospital by security when the little girl grabbed the hem of her jacket and whispered the first words she had spoken in 4 years. "Please, don't go." The guard stopped. The mother turned. The entire hallway went silent. And Elena Vasquez, a 34-year-old undocumented immigrant with dirt still under her fingernails and a deportation notice folded in her back pocket, stood in the middle of one of the most expensive hospitals in Los Angeles and felt the world tilt on its axis. Because that little girl was supposed to be mute. Every neurologist in the country had said so. Irreversible selective mutism, they called it. Psychological damage too deep to repair. They'd been saying it for 4 years, and Renata Voss, the most powerful woman in Silicon Valley, had spent $40 million trying to prove them wrong. She'd failed. Elena hadn't even tried. She'd just listened. This is the story of what happens when the most credentialed people in the world stop paying attention, and one woman with nothing to lose pays attention to everything. Before we go any further, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from right now. I believe stories like this one don't find you by accident. Keep watching. You need to hear this. The morning Elena Vasquez arrived at the Voss estate, it was raining so hard the Pacific Ocean had disappeared. You couldn't see it from the cliffs, even though the house sat right on the edge of Malibu's most expensive stretch of coastline. Usually, people paying $42,000 a month in mortgage could see the waves crashing below their terrace. That morning, there was nothing. Just gray. Just fog. Just the sound of water hammering glass. Elena stood at the service entrance with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a plastic bag over her head because she didn't own an umbrella. She was soaked through her jacket. Her shoes made sounds like small applause with every step. She'd taken a bus from East Los Angeles at 4:45 in the morning, transferred twice, and walked 12 minutes in the rain to get here. She needed this job. Not wanted, needed. Her son, Marco, was 8 years old with a hole in his heart, a literal one, a ventricular septal defect that the doctors at County General said needed surgical repair before he turned 10, where the complications would start compounding. The surgery cost more money than Elena had seen in her entire life. The waiting list for charity care was 22 months long. Private insurance wouldn't touch her. The clock was ticking with a sound she heard every single night when she lay in the dark in their one-bedroom apartment in Boyle Heights. So she'd taken every cleaning job she could find. Hotels, office buildings, private homes, and now, through a placement agency that asked fewer questions than most, she'd been hired as an outdoor groundskeeper for Renata Voss. A groundskeeper, in Malibu, in October. She'd never touched a garden in her life. She said yes anyway. The housekeeper who answered the service door was a thin, precise woman named Mrs. Hargrove, mid-50s, silver hair pinned so tightly it seemed to be holding her face together. She looked Elena up and down the way a jeweler examines a stone they're already planning to reject. "You're the new groundskeeper." "Yes, ma'am." "You're wet." "It's raining, ma'am." Something flickered in Mrs. Hargrove's eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but a grudging recognition. "Come in. Leave your shoes." Elena left her shoes and followed the woman through a kitchen that was larger than her apartment. Everything white, everything spotless. Every surface hard and cold and gleaming, like the inside of a machine. Mrs. Hargrove walked fast, talking faster. "You'll be responsible for the east and south gardens, the terrace planters, the greenhouse behind the pool house. You won't enter the main house unless I bring you inside specifically. You won't speak to Miss Voss. You won't make noise near the east wing between 9 and 11. That's when Sophia has her therapy sessions." Sophia is Miss Voss's daughter. A pause, brief, and weighted. "She doesn't speak. She hasn't spoken in 4 years. You will not attempt to engage her, not under any circumstances. The last 3 staff members who tried were dismissed immediately. Miss Voss is very protective." Elena nodded carefully. "How old is she?" 7. 7 years old. Silent for 4 years. Elena did the math without wanting to. The girl had been 3 when it started. "What happened to her?" Elena asked. Mrs. Hargrove stopped walking, turned. The look she gave Elena was like a door slamming shut. That's not your concern. Your concern is the garden. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Hargrove studied her for one more long moment. Good. The tool shed is unlocked. Start with the east beds. They haven't been touched in 3 weeks. She handed Elena a single laminated sheet with a layout of the property, turned, and was gone. Elena stood alone in the white kitchen, rain hammering the skylights overhead, and breathed. Lord, she thought, I don't know what I'm doing here. She didn't know it yet, but God was going to answer that question in a way she never expected. The East Garden was a disaster. Not ugly. Nothing on this property could be truly ugly. The bones were too good, the view too breathtaking, even in the rain. But the beds were overgrown and confused, plants choking each other, weeds threading through rose stems, a climbing jasmine that had gone rogue and swallowed half a trellis. It looked like a garden that had once been loved, and then, quite suddenly, had been forgotten. Elena worked for 6 hours that first day without stopping. She didn't know the formal names of half the plants, but she knew what needed space to breathe and what was being strangled. She knew how to listen to things. She'd always been like that, attentive, observant. Her abuela had called it her gift. Mija, you notice what other people walk past. That's from God. By early afternoon, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Elena was on her knees in the mud, carefully separating a tangle of lavender from an encroaching root system when she noticed the girl. She was standing on the other side of a low hedge, maybe 15 feet away, small, dark-haired, wearing yellow rain boots that were 2 sizes too big and a white sweater with a blue whale on the front. She was standing completely still, watching Elena work with an expression of absolute concentration. Elena didn't react. She kept working. She could see the girl in her peripheral vision, could see the slight tilt of her head, the way her hands hung loose at her sides, the way she was barely breathing. Elena had grown up around children who'd seen things they weren't supposed to see. She knew that look, the look of a child who'd learned that showing interest usually meant someone would notice them and send them away. So Elena didn't look up. She just kept working, and after about 2 minutes, she began doing something she always did when she gardened alone. She started talking, not to the girl, not to anyone, just out loud, to the plants, to the air, to herself, the way her grandmother had taught her. Okay, this one's being dramatic, she murmured, wrestling with a root. You think you own this whole bed? Mija, you are a weed. You are taking up space that doesn't belong to you. She sat back on her heels, examining the lavender. And you, look at you. You are gorgeous, aren't you? You just need a little room to breathe, that's all. Everyone needs that. From the corner of her eye, she saw the girl take 1 step closer. Elena kept talking, about the plants, about the rain, about how the jasmine over there had probably been planning this hostile takeover for years, very calculated, very sneaky, like someone who smiles at you at the office and then steals your parking spot. The girl took another step. By the time the gardener's afternoon bell rang at 4 o'clock, Sophia Voss was standing 3 feet away, watching Elena with her head tilted to one side and the ghost of something on her face that wasn't quite a smile but was leaning in that direction. Elena gathered her tools slowly. She looked up at the sky, not at the girl. Good rain today, she said quietly, to no one. Good for the garden. She stood, shouldered her bag, and walked back toward the tool shed. She didn't look back, but she heard it, just barely, the soft crunch of yellow rain boots turning in the gravel as the girl watched her go. Pay attention, something whispered inside Elena. She was already paying attention to everything. A week passed. Elena learned the garden. More than that, she learned the rhythms of the garden, what it wanted, what it was fighting against, where the light fell in the afternoon and where the soil held too much water, and why 3 of the rose bushes along the south wall were losing color. She fixed what she could. She researched on her phone at night what she couldn't figure out during the day. She watched videos about soil acidity and root separation and the specific needs of coastal Mediterranean planting. She didn't have to. She was a groundskeeper, not a botanist. but she wanted to do it right. And every afternoon, around 2:15, Sophia appeared. Always the yellow rain boots, even on dry days. Always the white whale sweater or a variation of it. It seemed to be a whole collection. Always the same careful stillness, the same watchful eyes. Elena always pretended not to see her and always kept talking. To the plants, to the birds, to herself. She told the garden about her son, Marco, about how he liked to collect bottle caps and had named every pigeon in their neighborhood, and cried when the school library got rid of its encyclopedia set because, he said, books deserve to stay on shelves. She told the garden about her own grandmother in Guadalajara, who had a garden of her own, smaller, simpler, nothing like this, but who could coax a tomato plant back from the brink of death with a combination of coffee grounds and prayer that Elena still didn't fully understand. She told the garden she was scared, sometimes, about Marco's surgery, about money, about the envelope she'd been carrying in her back pocket for 3 weeks now, the one from immigration, the one she couldn't bring herself to open. She never addressed Sophia directly. She didn't push. She didn't try. But on the 8th day, something changed. Elena was pruning the climbing roses on the eastern trellis, singing quietly under her breath, an old bolero her grandmother used to sing, something about rivers and returning home, when she heard it. A sound. Very small, almost not there. She stopped singing. Silence. She started again, softly. And there it was again, a sound from behind the hedge, barely audible, not quite a hum, not quite a note, but something, an attempt at something. Elena's heart stopped completely. She kept singing. She didn't turn around. Her hands kept moving on the roses, steady, gentle, and her voice kept going. And from behind the hedge, that small broken sound kept trying, kept reaching toward the melody like a plant reaching toward light. When the afternoon bell rang, Elena gathered her tools slowly. She looked up at the eucalyptus trees swaying above the wall. "That song is called Sabor a mi," she said quietly to the air. "My grandmother taught me. It means a taste of me. It's a love song, old one, beautiful one." She paused. "Good afternoon," she added, the same way she always said it to the garden when she left. She walked to the tool shed. Behind her, in the golden afternoon quiet, she heard the sound again. Tiny, fragile, trying. Elena pressed her back against the tool shed wall out of sight and let the tears come for exactly 30 seconds. Then she wiped her face, packed her bag, and walked to the bus stop. She had research to do tonight, not about plants, about selective mutism in children, about trauma and silence, and the long, quiet road back to sound. 3 days later, Elena left something in the garden. Not conspicuously. She didn't make a production of it. She simply placed it on the low stone wall near the hedge where Sophia always stood, wedged between 2 planters so the wind wouldn't take it. A small clay pot. In the pot, a seedling, a tiny, fragile thing, barely 2 inches tall, pale green, trembling in the coastal breeze. Under the pot, a folded note. In careful block letters, not cursive because she'd noticed Sophia was 7 and many 7-year-olds couldn't read cursive yet, she wrote, "This is a moonflower. It only blooms at night. It needs someone to water it every day or it will forget how to bloom. Maybe you could look after it." She didn't sign it. She went to work on the south beds and didn't look at the wall. An hour later, when she walked past, the pot was gone. The note was still there. But when she picked it up, she saw something on the back, written in a handwriting so small and careful it looked like a child trying to be invisible even on paper. "What if I don't water it right?" Elena stood for a long time, staring at those 7 words. Then she took out her own pen and wrote on the bottom, "You can't get it wrong. Plants just want to know someone is paying attention. That's all any living thing wants." She folded the note and put it back on the wall. The next morning, it was gone. 2 weeks in, Elena had a problem. She'd started to notice something about Sophia, something that Mrs. Hargrove and the therapists and the medical teams and Renata Voss herself apparently hadn't noticed, or had noticed and dismissed, or had stopped being able to see because they were too close. It happened 3 times before Elena was certain. The first time, Sophia was at her usual spot by the hedge, watching Elena transplant a hydrangea. A phone rang somewhere inside the house, loud, sudden, that jarring electronic bleat of a speakerphone. Every other person on the property reacted. Mrs. Hargrove appeared from nowhere, scowling. One of the other staff members startled so badly she dropped a tray. Sophia didn't react at all. Not a flinch, not a blink, nothing. Elena had noticed, but she'd filed it away. Kids are unpredictable. The second time, Elena was working near the open kitchen window. She'd been talking, as she always did, and she called back to her assistant Pedro, a 60-year-old Salvadoran man who took care of the north garden and was the only person on the property who treated Elena like a peer, calling out to ask him to pass the shears. She called once, twice, 3 times, her voice getting louder each time. Sophia was 10 feet away. She watched Elena calling with that tilted head expression, but she didn't look toward Pedro. She looked toward Elena's mouth. She's reading my lips, Elena thought, very quietly in the back of her mind. The third time erased all doubt. It was a Tuesday. Elena was near the greenhouse, and Sophia had ventured closer than usual, maybe 6 feet now, the invisible barriers slowly dissolving day by day. Elena was repotting orchids and talking about Marco, about how he'd called her the night before to report that a new pigeon had appeared on their fire escape, an unusual one with a white patch on its wing, and he'd named it Paloma, even though, Elena pointed out, Paloma just meant pigeon, which Marco had found philosophically interesting. She was laughing as she said it, looking down at the orchid. She didn't notice when a bee, large, aggressive, the kind that sounds like a small machine, flew directly past Sophia's ear, close enough to brush her hair. Sophia didn't react. Not a flinch, not a startle, nothing. Elena set down the orchid very carefully. She turned to face Sophia directly for the first time. The girl blinked, tensed slightly, ready to retreat. Elena smiled, slowly. She raised one hand in a small wave. Sophia, after a long pause, raised one hand back. Then Elena did something she hadn't done before. She pointed at her own ear questioningly. Just that. One finger pointed at her ear, and then at Sophia, and then a small, gentle shrug, the universal language of, "I'm wondering something. Is it okay if I wonder?" Sophia's face went very still. Then, so slowly it was barely a movement, she shook her head. Not, "No, don't ask." "No, I can't." Elena's chest cracked open. There it was. Not selective mutism, not psychological damage, not a child who had chosen silence, a child who was living in it. That night, Elena sat on the floor of her apartment with Marco asleep in the next room, and she researched for 4 hours straight. Not about the garden, about pediatric auditory nerve conditions, about the relationship between sudden childhood hearing loss and subsequent loss of speech, about how often the two were misdiagnosed as purely psychiatric, about a condition she'd read about once, years ago, a benign but debilitating growth on the auditory nerve that could emerge in early childhood, that could progressively block sound, that could be removed with surgery, that was sometimes missed because the child's response to hearing loss was so complete, so internalized, that the behavioral symptoms looked exactly like the aftermath of trauma. Her grandmother's voice came back to her. "God doesn't always send the answer in a white coat, mija. Sometimes he sends it in work boots." Elena's hands were shaking as she read. She thought about Sophia, about the way the girl had started responding to the vibrations in the garden before she responded to sound, the way she tracked Elena's mouth, the way she'd looked when the bee flew past her ear and she hadn't heard it, not frightened, not aloof, just absent. The particular vacancy of someone listening hard for something that isn't coming. She thought about her cousin Beto, who'd gone partially deaf at 5 from a fever and spent 3 years not talking before anyone thought to check his hearing. By the time they found the damage, her mother had put him through 4 rounds of psychological therapy for emotional withdrawal disorder. She thought about Sophia's therapists, her neurologists, her mother's $40 million. She thought about a 7-year-old girl in yellow rain boots who was trying to hum along to a love song she could barely hear. Lord, she thought, what do you want me to do with this? She already knew. She was just terrified to do it. Getting to Renata Voss was not a simple thing. Elena had heard stories about the woman from the other staff, told in whispers near the coffee station in the service kitchen. Renata Voss was 41. She'd built her company, a data security firm, from a 2-person startup in a Palo Alto garage to a corporation with offices in 11 countries. She was on the covers of magazines. She gave speeches at Davos. She was relentless, driven, brilliant, and since the death of her husband 4 years ago, completely unreachable. He died in a car accident, Mrs. Hargrove had told someone, not knowing Elena was listening from the supply closet. Sophia was in the car, 3 years old. She was the only one who survived. She hasn't made a sound since. And there it was. Everyone had seen a little girl who watched her father die and went silent from grief. It was a story that made heartbreaking, terrible sense. So that's what they treated. That's what $40 million went toward, grieving, traumatized silence. Nobody had thought to ask if she could actually hear the world she'd gone silent in. Elena asked Mrs. Hargrove for a meeting with Miss Voss on a Wednesday morning. Mrs. Hargrove looked at her the way you look at someone who has just announced they plan to speak directly to God. Absolutely not. Mrs. Hargrove, I have a concern about Sophia that I really need. You are the groundskeeper. I know, but your concern about Sophia, whatever it is not appropriate, not your business, and frankly, the kind of presumption that has gotten other staff members dismissed. I told you on day 1. She can't hear, Elena said. Mrs. Hargrove stopped. The kitchen went quiet, except for the refrigerator hum. What did you say? I think Sophia can't hear, or can barely hear. I think it's a medical condition, not... I think the silence is because she can't hear us, not because she won't speak. Elena kept her voice steady, even though her heart was hammering. I've been watching her for 2 weeks. She doesn't react to sudden sounds. She reads lips. She felt the vibration of my voice through a garden wall before she tracked my face. These aren't the behaviors of selective mutism. These are the behaviors of a hearing-impaired child who's been failed by a misdiagnosis. Mrs. Hargrove's face had gone through approximately 8 different expressions during this speech. She landed on one Elena couldn't read. That's a very serious allegation. I know. You have no medical training. I have eyes, Elena said, and I've been paying attention. Long silence. I'll pass your concern to Miss Voss's office, Mrs. Hargrove said finally, her voice carefully neutral. I cannot promise anything. Thank you, Elena said. She went back to the garden. She weeded the south beds. She transplanted 2 struggling camellias. She checked on the moonflower seedling she'd seen Sophia carrying toward the east terrace that morning. She waited. The call came at 4:30 that afternoon. Not from Mrs. Hargrove, from Renata Voss's personal assistant, a young man named Dylan with a careful voice and careful words, asking Elena to come to the main house at 6. She went home first. Changed into her one clean blouse, the navy blue one with small pearl buttons she'd bought for Marco's school concert. She braided her hair. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long time. You don't know anything for certain, she told her reflection. You could be wrong. You could ruin everything. You could be fired, deported, humiliated. Her reflection stared back. But what if you're right? She went. Renata Voss in person was different from Renata Voss on magazine covers. The magazine version was polished, armor-plated, a woman who seemed to be made of titanium and ambition. The woman who opened the door of her private study at 6 o'clock was different. Same sharp face, same dark eyes, same pulled-together posture, but there were shadows under her eyes that makeup had given up trying to cover, and the way she held herself wasn't confidence, It was the practiced stillness of someone who had learned to seem strong in public and had forgotten how to turn it off in private. She looked at Elena for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. Elena sat. Renata didn't. She stood near the window, arms crossed, looking out at the darkening ocean. "Mrs. Hargrove tells me you have a theory about my daughter." Her voice was neutral, careful, the voice of a woman who had learned to contain herself completely. "Yes, ma'am." "You've worked here 2 weeks." "Yes, ma'am." 3 neurologists, 2 developmental psychologists, a team from Johns Hopkins, 1 specialist from Munich, and a highly regarded therapeutic center in Switzerland have all assessed Sophia over the past 4 years. Renata's voice was still very controlled, but something in it was vibrating, like a string pulled too tight. They all concluded the same thing. "I know. And I'm not a doctor, I know that. I'm not here to tell you they're wrong. I couldn't know that. I'm here to tell you what I've observed, and I'm asking you to have one more person look at her, one more test, an audiology evaluation, a specific one, for auditory nerve conditions in children." Renata turned from the window. Her eyes were very bright. "My daughter's silence," she said, each word precisely placed, "is the result of surviving a trauma that took her father from her at age 3. Every expert I have consulted has confirmed this. Miss Voss, I have accepted that diagnosis. It has taken me 3 years to accept it. I have built my daughter's entire support system around it, her therapy, her education, her daily routines. I understand. Do you?" And now the control slipped, just slightly, just enough that Elena could see what was underneath. "Do you understand what it cost me to accept that my daughter would need to rebuild from the inside out? What it cost me to stop waiting every morning for her to just—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I understand," Elena said softly, "that you have been surviving the same thing your daughter has been surviving, and that it is terrifying to think that the map you've been using might not match the territory." Renata Voss stared at her. "I noticed 3 things," Elena said. She kept her voice quiet and clear, the way she'd practiced on the bus. "The first is that Sophia doesn't react to sudden sounds, not a loud phone, not a dropped tray, not a bee near her ear. The second is that she consistently tracks the mouth of anyone she watches, not their eyes. She's reading lips. The third is that she responded to my voice, to the vibration of it, through a stone wall, before she ever looked at my face." Silence. "These things together," Elena said, "in a child who was 3 years old when she stopped speaking, the exact age when hearing loss from a slow-growing condition would have reached a critical threshold, these things do not look like selective mutism to me. They look like a child who cannot hear." Renata was very still. "And I know I'm a groundskeeper. I know. I have no credentials. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I have been watching your daughter every afternoon for 2 weeks, and she has been watching me. And somewhere in that, I don't know, somewhere in that, she trusted me with this. And I think God put me here to say it to you." The silence stretched so long Elena began to wonder if she'd gone too far with the last part. Then Renata Voss sat down, not at her desk, just sat down right there on the edge of the rug, like her legs had simply decided they were done. She pressed both hands over her mouth. The tears, when they came, were completely silent. "She hasn't made a sound in 4 years," Renata whispered behind her hands. "Not one sound." "I know," Elena said gently. "If you're right, I might not be. I might be completely wrong. But if there's a chance, if you're right," Renata said again, her voice cracking apart, "then I spent 4 years treating grief when my daughter was sitting in darkness and I didn't see it. I didn't see it. You love her. You were doing everything you knew how to do. The people you trusted told you the same story over and over until you believed it. That's not a failure of love. That's a failure of attention, and it wasn't yours." Renata looked at her. "Why are you here?" she asked, not hostile, genuinely asking. "Why are you a groundskeeper? You're not. Why are you here?" "My son needs heart surgery. I need the money." Something moved through Renata's face. "1 test," Elena said. That's all I'm asking. One audiology evaluation, the specific kind, for auditory nerve conditions in young children. If I'm wrong, and I'll leave quietly and I won't say another word about it." Renata was quiet for a long time. Then Renata stood up, pressed her hands against her thighs, and said, "Monday morning, you'll come with us." The weekend was the longest of Elena's life. She took Marco to the park on Saturday, watched him chase the pigeon with the white patch. Paloma had followed Marco home one afternoon, which Marco considered confirmation that they were now officially bonded, and tried to be present and calm and not run the entire Monday scenario through her head every 45 seconds. If she's wrong, she reminded herself on the bus, on Saturday night, on Sunday morning, on Sunday night. If she's wrong, she loses the job. She's back to square one. Marco's surgery is another 6 months away, minimum. Her Bible fell open Sunday night to a passage she knew well, but always seemed to find at exactly the right moment. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Sound mind. Elena almost laughed. "I hear you," she told God. Monday came. The audiologist's office was in Westwood, in a building full of quiet, careful people doing quiet, careful work. Renata Voss arrived with Sophia, dressed in the whale sweater and yellow boots, and without any of the usual entourage, just her and the child, and at Renata's specific and slightly surprising request, Elena. Sophia recognized Elena in the waiting room. The girl's face went through a rapid series of tiny calculations, the way children's faces do when they encounter someone outside their expected context. And then, so quickly Elena almost missed it, something settled, something relaxed. She walked over to Elena without being told to. Renata watched this happen with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. The audiologist, a small woman named Dr. Park with warm hands and very gentle movements, ran the preliminary tests with Sophia alone. Simple ones first: tone detection, sound localization, bone conduction. Then she came out of the testing room and asked to speak with Renata privately. Elena sat with Sophia in the waiting room. Sophia was looking at the door her mother had gone through. Her hands were very still in her lap. Elena reached into her bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, she'd brought it deliberately, and unfolded it on the table between them. It was a drawing Marco had made, his fire escape, with Paloma the pigeon on the railing, and below it the street and the bus, and a woman who was probably Elena walking toward it. Sophia looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she pointed at the woman. "Yes," Elena said, and made sure Sophia was looking at her face when she said it. "That's me. My son drew it." Sophia looked at the drawing again. Then she pointed at the pigeon. "His name is Paloma," Elena said, watching Sophia watch her mouth. "Paloma means pigeon in Spanish. My son thought this was very funny." The corner of Sophia's mouth twitched. Elena pointed at the drawing, then at Sophia, making the question clear with her expression. "Would you like it?" Sophia looked at her. Then she nodded. Elena folded the drawing and pressed it into the small girl's hand. The door opened. Renata came out. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were enormous, and when she looked at Sophia, something in her face broke wide open with a tenderness so raw and sudden it was almost painful to witness. She crossed the waiting room and knelt in front of her daughter, right there among the chairs and old magazines, and she took Sophia's face in both hands with an incredible gentleness, and she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Baby, I'm so sorry. Mommy's so sorry. I'm going to fix this, I promise." Sophia stared at her mother. Then, slowly, carefully, the way you lower something precious and irreplaceable into a fragile container, she leaned her forehead against her mother's. Elena looked away. She looked at the ceiling tiles. She pressed her fist against her mouth. "Thank you," she said silently. "To God, to the universe, to whoever was listening. Thank you."
Dr. Park came out and explained it to Elena later in the hallway, because Renata asked her to. She felt she owed that. There was an acoustic neurola, a benign tumor on Sophia's right auditory nerve, slow growing, It had likely begun developing when Sophia was 2, or possibly earlier, but it had reached critical mass around age 3, when her hearing had degraded rapidly enough to affect her speech development. The condition was well documented. The surgery to remove it was established, effective, with excellent outcomes in children. It had been missed entirely at every prior evaluation, because every evaluation had begun with the assumption that the silence was psychological, because no one had run an audiology evaluation, because the story they'd been told was so emotionally coherent and so complete that no one had looked past it. Selective mutism in trauma survivors can present very similarly to hearing loss in children, Dr. Park said carefully. The behavioral profile overlaps significantly. Without a hearing evaluation, which wouldn't necessarily be the first step in a trauma-focused assessment. "But she's 7, Elena said. "You didn't evaluate her hearing over 4 years?" Dr. Park paused. "She was consistently assessed within a trauma framework. There was no flag in her chart indicating a need for audiological review." "There was no flag," Elena said quietly, "because everyone was looking at the story. Nobody was looking at the child." The doctor said nothing. Elena went back to the waiting room. The surgery was scheduled 3 weeks later at UCLA Medical Center. In the weeks between, something began to happen in the garden. Sophia started coming earlier, not hiding behind the hedge, but sitting on the stone wall openly, watching Elena work. They had developed their own language, partly lip reading, partly gesture, partly a kind of spatial understanding that didn't need words. Elena would show Sophia something in the garden, and Sophia would respond with her eyes, her hands, the tilt of her head. They discussed, apparently, the ongoing problem of the south wall jasmine, which Elena had declared a menace, and Sophia seemed to find deeply sympathetic. Elena brought a second moonflower pot. She and Sophia planted it together, Sophia's small hands in the dirt, Elena guiding the root placement with gentle fingers. When they finished, Sophia looked at the planted seedling for a long time. Then she looked at Elena and pressed both palms together. Elena recognized the gesture. She'd invented it herself years ago for Marco when he was small and words weren't enough. It meant safe. She pressed her palms together back. Renata watched this from the kitchen window more than once. Elena noticed but didn't acknowledge it. She was starting to understand that Renata Voss processed things by watching, by staying very still and taking things in, and that the best thing Elena could do was let her watch. 3 days before the surgery, Renata called Elena into the study again. This time, Elena wasn't nervous. She didn't know why exactly. She just wasn't. "I want to offer you something," Renata said. "Miss Voss?" "Your son, Marco, his surgery." Elena went very still. "I've spoken with the surgical team at Children's Hospital. They have an opening in 4 weeks. Your son's case has been reviewed. The surgery is straightforward, high success rate procedure." Renata paused. "I would like to cover it. All of it. Pre-op, surgical team, recovery, any follow-up." "I can't accept—" "Yes, you can. I haven't done anything that deserves—" "You saw my daughter." Renata's voice was quiet and clear. "You paid attention to her when the most expensive specialists in the world had stopped looking. You did not do this for money or recognition. You did it because it was right." A pause. "Let me do this because it's right." Elena pressed her palms flat against her thighs. The room seemed very large and very quiet. "There's one more thing," Renata said. "I'd like to offer you a full-time position, not as a groundskeeper, as Sophia's primary caregiver. You would work with her therapeutic team, the actual team, not the trauma-focused one, the new one we're building around her specific hearing rehabilitation. You would be the constant, the person she trusts." "I'm not a therapist." "You're better than that," Renata said simply. "You're the person she trusts." Elena was quiet for a very long time. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Yes." "The envelope in my back pocket, the one from immigration. I've been carrying it for a month." Renata looked at her steadily. "I have a very good attorney, if you'll let me make a call."
The surgery lasted 6 hours. Elena spent those 6 hours in the waiting room with a Bible in her lap and Marco at her side. She hadn't wanted to leave him, and Renata had said, "Bring him, please, there's plenty of room." And Marco spent the time feeding the vending machine crackers from his backpack to what he claimed were sparrows outside the window, but were definitely pigeons. And Elena spent the time not reading the Bible, just holding it, the way her grandmother had taught her, that sometimes you don't need the words, you just need the weight. Renata sat 3 chairs away, not pacing, just very still. The stillness of someone who is committed completely to a weight and has nothing left to do but endure it. At one point, Marco climbed into the chair between them, announced that he was bored, and asked Renata if she wanted to see his bottle cap collection. He had 14 of them in a small case in his backpack, sorted by color. Renata Voss, 41 years old, in a $1,200 jacket, looked at the bottle caps with absolute seriousness and said, "This is a very good collection. Where did you find the orange one?" Marco lit up like a lamp. Elena watched them talk about bottle caps for 20 minutes and felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been clenched since the morning she got on that first bus to Malibu, since the morning she'd found the immigration notice, since the morning Marco's doctor had said the word surgery in that careful, measured way that meant they both needed to take a breath. Something unclenched. Not completely, not forever, just enough to breathe. "Thank you," she said again, quietly, to whoever was listening. The surgeon came out at 4:40 in the afternoon. She was smiling, not the careful smile doctors use to manage expectations, a real one, the kind that starts in the eyes. "The procedure was completely successful," she said. "Full removal. The nerve is intact. Auditory function should return progressively over the next 6 to 12 weeks as the inflammation reduces and the nerve recovers. In children this age, the brain's plasticity is remarkable. We have every reason to expect—" Renata made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, low and broken and completely unguarded, the sound of a person who has been holding something enormous for 4 years and has just been told they can put it down. The surgeon gave her a moment. "Can I see her?" Renata asked. "Yes, she's awake." Renata stood, then she stopped and looked back at Elena. "Come," she said. The recovery room was dim and quiet. Sophia lay in the bed looking very small against the white of the sheets, her hair spread out, an IV in the back of her hand, her eyes half open and foggy from the anesthesia. She was wearing a hospital gown. But someone, a nurse presumably, had placed the small whale drawing Marco had made on the table beside her. Elena didn't ask how it had gotten there. She suspected Sophia had been holding it when they brought her in. Renata sat on the edge of the bed and took her daughter's hand very gently. Sophia's eyes opened a little further. "Hey, baby," Renata whispered. "I'm here. You did so good." Sophia blinked slowly, looked at her mother, then looked past her, found Elena. Elena stepped forward. Sophia's small hand reached out, not toward her mother, but toward Elena, fingers extended, asking. Elena took her hand. They stayed like that for a while, the 3 of them, the machines quietly beeping, Marco out in the hall telling the nurse about Paloma. 6 weeks later, the sound started coming back. It came in fragments at first, low frequencies, vibrations that Sophia described to her new therapist with a precision that suggested she'd been cataloging silence for a very long time and was now cataloging its dismantling with the same careful attention. "It sounds like the garden," she told Dr. Park, who was now part of her new care team. "Low, like the garden feels." By the 8th week, she could hear voices. The first one she heard clearly, not felt through vibration, not tracked through lip movement, but heard with both ears in real sound, was Elena's. They were in the Malibu garden. Autumn had come properly now. The light was different, lower and gold, and the garden had been put to bed for the season, mulched and covered and prepared for winter, the way gardens need to be put to bed, carefully, the way you tuck in a child. Elena was talking, as she always did, about Marco, About Paloma, the pigeon, who had, according to Marco, now learned to knock on the fire escape window when she wanted crackers. About the moonflowers, which had bloomed for the first time 2 nights ago, white and enormous, exactly as promised, exactly as named. She felt Elena's hand close around her wrist. She stopped. Sophia was looking at her. Her face was different. Something in it was different, open, wide, the face of someone hearing the world for the first time. "Your voice," Sophia said. Her own voice was rough and small and strange to itself. She looked startled by it, then fascinated, then frightened, then something else entirely. It was the first word she had spoken in 4 years. Elena didn't say anything. She pressed both palms together. Sophia pressed both palms together back. Then she opened her mouth again. "It sounds like the garden," she said. "Your voice, it sounds warm, like the garden." Elena pulled her close. She held her there, this child she'd known for 2 months and somehow loved for longer than that, and she cried into her hair, the quiet, grateful tears of someone who has done the one thing they were put somewhere to do. "You have a beautiful voice," Elena whispered. "I knew you did. I just knew it." Renata found them like that a few minutes later. She stopped at the garden gate, briefcase in hand, jacket still on from the office. Sophia looked up at her mother. "Mommy," she said. One word. 4 years. Renata dropped the briefcase. She crossed the garden in 4 steps and gathered her daughter into her arms, kneeling in the dirt without a thought about the $1,200 jacket, holding her child with the wholeness of someone who has just been given back everything they thought they'd lost. "I hear you, baby," she said. "I hear you." "I can hear you too," Sophia said against her mother's shoulder. "You sound like you've been crying." Renata laughed, a real laugh, out loud, the first one Elena had heard from her. It sounded like someone discovering a room in their house they'd forgotten existed. "I have been, a little," she said. Elena stood a few feet away, looking at the garden, at the moonflowers wrapped up for winter, at the 2 moonflower pots that Sophia had moved to the east terrace where she could see them from her bedroom window. "Elena," Sophia called. She turned. Sophia's one arm around her mother's neck and one arm extended toward Elena. "Come here," she said, with the careful deliberateness of someone practicing the sound of words. "Come here. You're part of this." Elena came. The 3 of them stood together in the afternoon gold of the Malibu garden, and for a long moment none of them said anything. They didn't need to. There are silences that are heavy, thick, like something has died, and then there are silences like this one, light, full, alive, the kind that come after something broken has been made whole, the kind that feel like the world breathing.
3 months later, Marco's surgery was successful. The hole in his heart was repaired on a Thursday morning in January. Elena held his hand until they took him through the double doors, and when they brought him back 4 hours later, the surgeon said the words she had been holding space for 2 years. "He's going to be absolutely fine." Marco's first question upon waking from anesthesia was whether Paloma had been fed. Sophia visited him in the recovery room and brought him a new bottle cap, gold from a specialty Italian lemonade, very rare, very prized. Marco studied it with the gravity of a jeweler and declared it the finest piece in the collection. Sophia smiled. It was getting easier for her every day, the smiling, the hearing, the talking, the sounds of the world flooding in slowly, the way light comes back after a long winter, not all at once, but steady, and then suddenly, surprisingly, everywhere. She told Elena once, in the garden, that the hardest thing about hearing was how full it was, how much was in it. She hadn't known in the silence how much she was missing. "Does it feel like too much sometimes?" Elena asked. Sophia thought about it. "No," she said. "It feels like when you water a plant that's been dry a long time, and you can almost see it breathing again." Elena looked at her. "You're going to be a poet," she said. Sophia scrunched her nose. "Maybe a gardener." Elena laughed. "You can be both." Elena Vasquez became Sophia's primary care coordinator,
working alongside the child's audiological and speech rehabilitation team. Within 8 months, Sophia's hearing had recovered to near normal levels in both ears. Her speech development, while behind chronologically, progressed rapidly. Children's brains, as the surgeon had promised, being remarkable things. Marco Vasquez had his follow-up cardiac evaluation 6 months after surgery. His heart, the cardiologist said, was as healthy as any heart she had seen. He celebrated by adding a silver bottle cap from a Moroccan soda to his collection, which Renata Voss had sourced specifically from a business trip to Casablanca. He named it after Paloma. Renata Voss made 2 decisions in the aftermath of her daughter's diagnosis. The first was to donate $3 million to a foundation studying misdiagnosis in pediatric trauma cases, specifically to fund audiology screening as a standard component of childhood trauma evaluation. The second was to become, in her words, slower, more present, to choose every morning to look at the world the way Elena looked at gardens, as something alive, something communicating, something worth paying actual attention to. She was not always good at it. Old habits are old habits. But she was trying. Elena Vasquez's immigration case was resolved with the help of Renata's attorney. She has been a legal resident for 8 months now. She still talks to the plants. There are children in this world sitting in silences nobody is looking past. There are diagnoses on charts that nobody is questioning because the story is already written and the story makes sense, and nobody has time to look again. God does not always send the answer in the package we expect. Sometimes he sends it in work boots, in a canvas bag, on a 4:45 a.m. bus from East Los Angeles. Sometimes he sends it through the person no one thought to look at. And sometimes the miracle isn't in the removal, isn't in the surgery, isn't in the moment sound comes back into the world. Sometimes the miracle is simply this: someone decided to see. If this story reached you today, it reached you for a reason. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, like. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I'll be here, paying attention.